This is a podfic of Outside the Window, a KinnPorsche fanfic by Solitary Bird. Read for you by Solitary Bird. This fic is rated M for graphic depictions of violence, Bamf Kim, attempted kidnapping, drugging, chloroform, competent kun, soft Porsche, hurt comfort, and a delusional Tawan. What if Kim had managed to fight off all the thugs attempting to kidnap Chay the first time, and he never ends up in the warehouse? Chapter 1, A Rude Awakening. He's not sure what wakes him at first, but Kim's heart is pounding. Porsche isn't laying next to him on the sofa, though his spot is still warm. There's an alarm going off internally, telling him that Chay hasn't just woken early to go make breakfast or head to the bathroom. This instinct is proven to be right when he hears the kids scream his name. Then Kim is out the door and in the front garden without wearing his shoes, so quickly that it's almost as if he teleported there. A little hold over him his sleep still held disappeared when he caught sight of Porsche running, followed by thugs that are obviously from the Miner family. There wasn't time to curse Vegas's obsession with tormenting Porsche. Two of them had already grabbed hold of the teen, despite his kicking and screaming. They were holding a cloth to his face. Kim leaped from the top step, kicking the nearest guy in the face, knocking him out. He fell to the ground like a stone, only to be replaced with someone with even less brain cells, who Kim took out with equal ease. Porsche was still screaming and struggling against his captors, but his movements were quickly becoming more and more erratic and lethargic. Fuck, Kim thought. They actually had the presence of mind to try and drug him. In hindsight, the white cloth should have been all he needed to get to that conclusion, but he had been sound asleep less than 5 minutes ago, and since debuting his wick, he hadn't really been involved in his family's problems, at least not to the knowledge of anyone but his father and kin. He elbowed some hulk of a guy wearing a badly fitting mask in the face, resulting in a resounding cracking noise from his nose that left him doubled over in pain. Kim sprinted the remaining distance to Porsche, who was now limp in the arms of two members of the Miner family, who were attempting to drag him into a nearby waiting van. That was easy. Kim was all adrenaline. Somewhere along the way he'd picked up a metal baseball bat, but its weight felt right in his hands, as he brought it down on the nearest man's skull, kicking the other in the back of the left knee. They both crumpled to the ground, and dropped a now floppy and slurring Porsche, who fell in his own heap on the floor. Kim grabbed Chay with the hand not currently holding a blood-covered baseball bat and pulled him up. If he's going to get Porsche out of here, it's going to have to be quick, because the guards that aren't unconscious are starting to groan and roll around on the floor. There isn't time. The house isn't an option. There are too many large glass windows that they can bust through, windows that are definitely not bulletproof. It's not a defensible position. Once they realise that Kim is here and relay that back, reinforcements are definitely going to come back with guns. If they had sent this many guys to kidnap a completely innocent teenage boy whose only crime was that his older brother was entangled with Kim's own older brother, it meant they were desperate to have him for whatever reason. Probably for leverage over Porsche and a way to get to kin. Not Vegas's work then. Unimaginative is not a word he would use to describe his cousin. His uncle, on the other hand. That meant Kim was going to have to hide him, whilst taking Chay back to his own apartment was tempting, and he was confident fighting off at least twice as many guys. Porsche was unconscious, and there was nowhere safer for him than by Porsche's side. He might not like Porsche, and find the control he had so quickly gained over kin to be disturbing, but if there was one thing Porsche was, it was a protective big brother. He'd fallen into organised crime to defend the little world he'd managed to create for Chay and the memories of his parents. Porsche was trying to say his name, but it came out as a drunk-sounding mix between P. Kim and P. Wick. It would have been Q under literally any other circumstance than this. Right now it was horrifying. Kim hoisted the younger boy's insubstantial weight over his shoulder to somewhat free up his arm, in order to check that they both had their phones. Once reassured that he hadn't dropped either of them along the way, Kim rushed to the spot where he had left his motorbike yesterday. He knew it was only a matter of time before the idiots in the getaway car would cotton on to the fact that their plan was being foiled. Despite that, he took a risk to take a moment to text Kin a secret phrase that would let him know Kim was in danger and coming back to the Major family's compound. Kim made sure to add Porsche's name to the end of the text. though whether in his rush he'd spelt it right was questionable. As much as he wanted to tell them everything, so that the best preparations could be made, there really wasn't the time to write any more than what he had. Hopefully both their older brothers wouldn't completely freak out and would enact the proper protocols for when someone in the family called for help. Kim took off the jacket he was wearing, tying it around both Porsche's waist and his own with as tight a knot as he dared. It was holding them together so that he wouldn't slip off the motorcycle, because Kim couldn't trust that Porsche was conscious enough to hold on to him properly, especially not with the way his attempts to speak were becoming increasingly slurred and hard to make out. He only had one helmet with him today, so it went on Chay's head, firmly clipped beneath his soft chin. Protect Nong Shay. Where we go in Kim. Somewhere safe, Shay. Hold on tight, it won't take long. They were off. Kim drove as fast as he felt he could with a semi-conscious pillion, followed eventually by the minor family getaway car that was now actively pursuing them. Bangkok city streetlights passed them by, blurs of light in the darkness, weaving between cars and other bikes to try and lose them. Kim could feel the phone ringing in Shay's pocket. They were that closely pressed together. It's probably a frantic Porsche. Kim didn't think Shay was able to notice that it was his phone ringing, or even remember where it was, so no one would be able to answer it. He himself needed both hands firmly on the handlebars if they weren't going to die today. His own phone started ringing the moment that Shay stopped, but he was in no position to answer that either. The bike dipped so low as Kim pulled another U-turn before heading up the narrow street that he almost lost control and dumped them both on the unforgiving asphalt. Shay was wearing shorts. His bare legs would be shredded, and that thought was enough for Kim to find the strength to wrench the bike upright once more. I really need to spend more time in the gym, Kim thought, as he finally spied a car with his brother's family favourite bodyguard hanging out of the front passenger window. Big was aiming a gun at the car behind them. He nodded to him as they passed by, and another car with Paul and Arm in it followed behind them, all the way to the compound. Behind them, the sound of gunfire echoed off of the concrete overpass, and Porsche's arms tightened around Kim's waist. The knot in the jacket's arms had tightened so much by the time they arrived at the compound that it was a massive struggle to get it undone, and Shay was struggling to stand even though he was holding onto Kim so tightly. Zip. Zip. It took longer than Kim wanted to think about for him to figure out what exactly Shay was saying to him. Yeah, we're safe here. Relatively, Kim added in his thoughts. There was a reason he didn't live in the main family's compound. Seeing him so drugged that he was still struggling to make intelligible sounds was painful and not helping the burning rage building in Kim's heart. Porsche first, violence later, he reminded himself. Porsche first, violence later. Shay, Porsche shouted from halfway across the courtyard as he ran at top speed towards them. Kim was still struggling with this goddamn knot when Shay's older brother barreled into them, knocking both of them over. Luckily, Shay was still wearing the bike helmet, but they were also still attached to one another, and Kim landed unceremoniously on top of him. All the breath Porsche had ever had in his entire life felt like it was blasted out of his lungs by Kim's full body weight crashing down on him. He worried that he might have cracked one of Shay's ribs. Kin walked out of the house and finally helped him get out of the goddamn jacket. He looked pointedly at the blood on Kim's hands and trousers, where he had wiped the thick of it before getting on the bike. Blood was greasy and wet, and he'd needed as good a grip on the handlebars as possible. Usually he wore gloves when riding, but he'd fled the house only moments after waking up. It's not mine or Porsche's. Some idiot from the Miner family I had to bray across the head with a metal baseball bat, Kim reassured both of the frantic older brothers that were now checking their respective baby brothers over for wounds. Well, that's good to hear. Kin doesn't sound happy to hear about it at all. What's wrong with Shay? Porsche added as he hoisted him up off of the floor, and the teen started drooling. We be someplace? What's he saying? Shay's older brother asked, starting to look panicked, supporting his body weight with one arm and gently patting his face with the other. I think he's asking if we're at the beach, Kim translated. Probably chloroform, but I'm not sure. I wasn't about to go sniffing it. Can we get him seen by somebody already? His heart was hammering away in his chest at the possibility that something bad could be happening inside of Chay as they stood here. Chloroform wasn't as simple and harmless as it was portrayed in old Hollywood movies as being. It was very toxic. It took a long time of constantly being breathed in to actually knock you unconscious. There was a reason that no one uses it in medical settings anymore. Chay was tiny, and he didn't trust that a hastily soaked rag wouldn't have a non-lethal amount of whatever it was the idiots who had tried to take him had dosed Chay with. Even if it wasn't chloroform, it could kill. There were plenty of other substances that could do that and more. Kim could feel the initial rush of adrenaline start to seep away now that he had Chay here in one piece, but it was quickly being replaced with anxiety that wouldn't let up until he knew he was actually fully safe. That could only be determined in the medical clinic within the compound they were stood outside of. All three of them, with the help of Arm and Paul, hauled the now completely boneless and drooling Porsche into the building and rushed him into the medical clinic, where staff were already waiting. Arm and Paul peeled off from the group to comfort Tankun, who they could all hear screaming in panic somewhere in the depths of the house, possibly in his rooms or in the panic room hidden within his private suite. Tankun was no doubt distraught at the thought of his baby brother being in danger, despite him being the scariest of all three of them. If he had decided to take the family business seriously, Kim would probably be scarier than Vegas, and that was really saying something because Vegas was, well, Vegas. Where his cousin was fire, Kim was ice. What feels like several hours later, they had all sat waiting for Porsche's blood test results in a side room, when Vegas turned up at the compound, dragging a very familiar face behind him. Tawan. It was clearly Tawan, but a Tawan that had also certainly seen better days. His face was swollen and covered in bruises. Both of his hands were missing fingernails, a sign Vegas himself had been the one to do it. Ripping out people's fingernails was his particular gruesome calling card when it came to torture. "We might not be best friends, dear cousins," Vegas said, his hand gripping Tawan by his hair. "But I also don't appreciate when people decide to have plans of their own and go directly against my orders." It didn't take a genius to see that his cousin was pissed off. Someone must have summoned more guards as they swarmed into the small waiting room the family has found themselves pushed into by the medical staff not long after. It takes 6 of them to drag Tawan out kicking and screaming his delusional love for Vegas. Vegas himself looks mildly disgusted. Kim doesn't really care where they're taking Tawan at this moment in time. More likely than not, it's the cells in the basement. Thinking of the danger that Chay was still in grounded Kim. He wouldn't let his mind wander to retribution until he was sure Porsche was okay. If it was chloroform they'd forced Chay to take, well, then there was the risk of cardiac problems. No, Kim needed a member of medical staff to tell him that Chay was okay. While they wait for that to happen, Vegas took the time to fill them in on what he had found out about the kidnapping plot from Tawan. Turns out Tawan was sick of being his cousin's little secret, and his father had planted the seed in his head that if he killed Porsche, then he'd give his permission to marry Vegas. Vegas had laughed at that when telling them, his face twisting into a sardonic smile. Kim looked over his older brother, who had once been ready to give Tawan the world, only to see him rub his hands morosely over his eyes, whilst Porsche stared at him confusedly. Apparently, they hadn't had that conversation yet. How awkward. His cousin was almost vibrating in anger that was no longer being held back by the talon-like grip on the hair of Tawan. Porsche and Macau are both in the environment club at school, and Macau had been so excited about this senior, who was just as obsessed as he is about this specific, critically endangered fish, or bird, or frog thing, as he is. Vegas literally can't hear the end of this kid going on and on about it. Macau doesn't have any friends and has been struggling in school, but Porsche is so close to being his friend that Vegas is willing to put aside a lot. His hatred of Kin might be one of those things. "Why have you been working against us?" Kin asked. He ceased his face rubbing and instead is holding hands with Porsche, who looks just as confused. "Pa, why have you been working against us?" Vegas retorted. "Pa." There was a stuffy silence that fell between them as everyone is forced to take in what has just been said. "Is it wrong of me for not wanting to be the most fucked up member of this dysfunctional family?" said Vegas, who had finally taken a seat instead of standing over them all, no longer looming like some giant bird of prey. You're not exactly going about that in the best way, cousin, sighed Kinn, gesturing to the door his formerly dead ex-boyfriend had been dragged out of. That might be true. Tankin's wails had long since reduced in volume to a decibel the residents of the main family compound were more used to. Paul and Al were damn good at their job. Kinn was glad that his oldest brother had them by his side. He would ensure the pair were suitably financially rewarded for their work. Speak of the devil, and he shall appear. Tankin had also just barreled through the door at breakneck speed, dressed in something lime green and fresh off the hot couture runway. There were perhaps 13 million baht worth of crystals thrown into it, and they made him glitter like a disco ball. A sophisticated disco ball. A very expensive and sophisticated disco ball. How is the baby meant to sleep if you're all arguing in here? Kinn demanded to all of their annoyance. Kim loved Tankin. His oldest brother had basically raised him, but he certainly chose the most inopportune moment to crash the party. Tankin bristled, scattering beams of light around the room. Kinn was doing that thing with his forehead that blatantly showed that he was annoyed Kinn was here. Porsche was bouncing his leg as if preparing to leap clear out of the room. Kinn turned his head to take in his cousin, only to see Vegas rolling his eyes. He rolled his own as he stood to hug his oldest brother, who folded Kim into his arms as if he was a precious gem. I've missed you, P, Kim sighed. Kinn's arms were safe. They'd always been safe, wrapped in whatever haute couture drapery P. Kinn had taken a liking to this season. Those arms felt like home. I've missed you too, Nong. We will have to catch up later. I have the perfect suit for your next live performance of Drowning in Petals. Unfortunately, that might have to be put on the back burner for a while. Tankin guided Kim back over to the seats, taking a set of chairs where everyone else could see them unobstructed. Now listen very carefully. I shall say this only once. Kun was still hugging Kim to his side, like he was a little kid once more, but the younger didn't find that he cared too much about that right now. Worry for Porsche was still bubbling uneasily in his chest. I know why Pa and Uncle have been at each other's necks this whole time. End of chapter 1.